Hello everyone and welcome to the online intervention of English 11B or reading and writing. We are only going to focus on our power standards that we have. For now, we're going to discuss critical reading skills. Reading to see what a text says may suffice when the goal is to learn specific information or to understand someone else's ideas. And we usually read with other purposes. We need to solve problems, to write reflections or researches. We need to follow instructions and many others. Most of the papers you will write will involve reflection on written text, just like what you're doing in reading and writing and research. And in order for you to write your own analysis, you need to do careful, critical reading of sources and to use them critically to make your own arguments. The judgment and interpretation you make of the text you read are the first steps towards formulating your approach. So we have the presentation overview, as you can see. So we are going to deal with the critical reading as looking for ways of thinking, non-critical versus critical reader, critical thinking as an extension of critical reading, looking for ways of thinking while reading. So I hope you can clearly see it on your monitors. So let us first define critical reading. So to read critically is to make judgments about how a text is argued. So this is a highly reflective skill requiring you, and you might have to read a text thoroughly once you get to have a basic grasp of content before you launch into an intensive critical reading. That's why rereading your novels, rereading your articles, your journals can always be done. So the key to doing this is, of course, to the following. Do not read, this one. Do not read primarily for information, and do read looking for ways of thinking about the subject. Also, let's go back here. Critical reading means engaging in what you read by asking yourself questions such as, what is the author trying to say? Or what is the main argument being presented? So again, the key is this. You don't read primarily for information only, but do read looking for ways of thinking about a subject matter. So here, we can also define critical reading as it involves presenting a reasoned argument that evaluates and analyzes what you've read. So of course, being critical in academic sense means advancing your understanding, not dismissing and therefore closing off learning. Of course, you are not going to merely criticize something, but then you have to take note of the following facts. Let us first differentiate non-critical readers to critical readers. Of course, they both have the text for you to read. And for non-critical readers, you are just going to provide the text only provide facts. Also, here, or non-critical readers gain knowledge by memorizing the statements within a text. Meanwhile, if you are asked to read a history book to learn the facts of the situation or to discover an accepted interpretation of those events. So that is just what's happening when you are a critical reader yourself. Also, critical readers recognize not only what a text says, just like what's written on the diagram, but also how the text portrays the subject matter. So critical readers also recognize the various ways in which each and every text is the unique creation of every author. So if you happen to have something, a book or a novel to work on, you might read the same way to appreciate how a particular perspective on the events and a particular selection of facts can lead to particular understanding. Next, to read critically is to exercise your judgment about what you are reading. That is, not taking anything you read at face value. So remember that when reading academic material, you will be faced with the author's interpretation and opinion. So different authors will, of course, have different stands. And you should always examine what you are reading critically and look for limitations, omissions, inconsistencies, oversights, and arguments against what you are reading. So that is one way on how are you going to read a book or a novel critically. Of course, while you're a student, you're expected to understand different viewpoints and make your own judgments based on what you've read. You do not just look on how the text appears or the face value. You need to dwell on what the author is trying to say, look closely on the main argument presented. Okay, so critical reading goes further than just being satisfied with what a text says. It also involves reflecting on what the text describes and analyzing what the text actually means in the context of your studies. So, as a critical reader, you should reflect on the following. First, what the text says, what a text describes, and of course, what a text interprets. So, let's first proceed to what the text says. So, of course, after critically reading a piece, you should be able to take down notes. Of course, while reading, it's very important that you have your own paraphrased key points. So that's for you to reflect upon. Also, what a text describes. You should be confident that you have understood the text sufficiently to be able to use your own examples and compare and contrast with other writing on the subject in hand. So it's very important that you know what a text describes and also what the text interprets or the interpretation of the text itself. So this means that you should be able to fully analyze the text and state a meaning for the text as a whole. So how do you see or how do you interpret this particular novel or particular book that you are trying to critically read? So for now, since we already know the definition of critical reading, let us first differentiate critical reading and critical thinking. So we can distinguish between critical reading and critical writing in the following, critical thinking in the following way. Of course, let's first have the definition of critical reading again. So this is a technique for discovering information and ideas within a text. And critical thinking is a technique for evaluating information and ideas, for deciding what to accept and what to believe. So both of them are techniques, but they only differ in their main function. For critical thinking, we have discovering alone or discovering only, while for critical thinking, we have evaluating. Meanwhile, these two actually go together. There. So critical thinking is an extension of critical writing, critical reading. So in actual work practice, critical reading and critical thinking work together. So the two together work in harmony. So critical thinking allows us, here's the first thing to remember. Critical thinking allows us to monitor our understanding as we read. So if we sense that assertions are irresponsible, so you can know that if you're actually critically thinking, we examine the text more closely to test our understanding. So that's for your critical reading. And also, critical thinking involves being rational and aware of your own feelings on the subject. So you should, being able to reorganize your thoughts, prior knowledge, and understanding to accommodate new ideas or viewpoints. So it's very important that you need to stay focused or to stay rational in whatever text you are analyzing or criticizing. And also, critical reading and critical thinking are therefore the very foundations of true learning and personal development. So conversely, critical thinking depends on critical reading. So you can think critically about a text, after all, only if you have understood it. Meaning, you can't think critically if you were not able to critically read what you are reading. So we may choose to accept or reject a presentation, but we must know why, of course. We have a responsibility to ourselves as well as to others to isolate the real issues of agreement or disagreement. So only then we can understand and respect other people's views. To recognize and understand those views, we must read critically. And of course, uh, This involves being open-minded. Ano po? So, thinking critically in the academic sense again involves being open-minded. So, using judgments and discipline to process what you are learning about something without letting your personal bias or opinion detract from the argument. So, it's actually the four are actually interconnected or overlapping with each other. Next, um, how do I read looking for ways of thinking? First, so these are the key elements in critical reading that are treating it as looking for ways of thinking and as reasoning. So here are the following steps that you may do. First is to determine the central claims or purpose of the text and how it is argued. So this one is very important. Also, we have to assess the evidence used to support the claim. So evidence may be in the form of supporting details and examples. And you may also use the following questions when assessing the evidence. So first, which evidence is essential? So especially this guide question is very important, especially if you're dealing with a very long text. So you look for the essential evidence that you think may help you to read critically. Also, what type of evidence is used? So is this statistical, historical, or factual, or anything that you may need? It's also very important to take note of that. And also, what is the quality of sources used? So here, your sources or your credible sources or your skill in detecting if a source is actually credible and reliable is very important. So you need to take note of the reliable and credible sources. And also, are the sources primary or secondary? But what do we mean with primary or secondary sources? Primary sources are those sources which provide a first-hand account of an event or time period. So they represent original thinking, reports on discoveries or events, or they can share new information. So often, these sources are created at the time the events occurred. For example, we have examples. We have the following examples: diaries, original documents such as birth certificate, that could also be autobiographies, manuscripts, interviews, speeches, oral histories, constitutions, government documents, statistical data, and research reports. Also, some creative artworks can also be a form of primary resources, including literature. Also, we have the newspaper advertisements and editorial and opinion pieces. Meanwhile, when we say secondary sources, that involves synthesis, analysis, uh, interpretation or evaluation of primary sources. So they often attempt to describe or explain primary sources. Ano po ba yung example ng secondary sources? So we have journal articles. So most of the journal articles that you are reading are actually secondary sources. So it also includes textbooks, dictionaries, encyclopedias, political commentaries, dissertation, newspaper, and many other. Let's proceed to the third. Analyze how the text is organized. So here, you may take note of the following. How does the author break down the ideas? So was it general to specific or specific to general? Also, we have how is language used? Is it formal or informal? We also have assess the context of the text. So this is the fourth one. So these are the guide questions that you may use for this one. Who is the audience of the text? So do you think it will be effective to address the audience, or will this source or will this text affect the audience? Also, what is the historical context in which the text is written? So do you think the setting has something to do with the information of evidence presented? Okay, because sometimes if a text is actually written during the pandemic crisis or the COVID-19 pandemic, it will actually affect how the author writes the text itself, and it will also affect how the readers or how the audience look at it if they experience the same setting that the author experienced. Also, we have what persona used or perspective taken by the writer. So here you're going to look on the point of view of the author. Let's have the last one. Link the reasoning contained in the text to other available texts. How do other texts confirm or refute the evidence provided in the text? Are there theories, concepts, or methods that support the evidence in the text? Or was there other articles proving the claim? So number 5 will also help you look at the source if this one is credible or reliable. So this ends our discussion. I hope you understood what was meant by critical reading and the ways of how are you going to critically read and critically think of something. So if you happen to have questions or clarifications, you can post it on our Facebook page, or you can send a direct message or a personal message to me. So thank you very much, and God bless.